My name is Rodolfo Levya, Rudy for short. It's easier to pronounce for most people. Within the field of media and communications, I guess my research takes two broad avenues. One is on the effects of social media on political participation, broadly. So in this realm, basically trying to figure out how the uses of social media either cause or correlate or in some way contribute to increasing political participation or decreasing political participation, or maybe no effect at all on young people, basically, under the premise that young people's engagement with civic and electoral activities has been continuously decreasing over the last 60 years or so, and it continues to be a downturn trend. About 18 years ago, when I guess Web 2.0 sort of initiated, there was this optimism that that was going to help to increase youth political participation. And so I'm looking into whether or not that's actually the case. It's not, by the way. That's it. The second area sort of concerns general how media affects people's cognitions more subliminally and automatically. So operating from a cognitive science perspective of information processing. And then from that, trying to figure out the different ways in which media stimuli of various kinds affect people's either cultural or political sort of attitudes, practices, and beliefs. I guess within my political participation in social media work, I more or less operate from two broad theories. One of them is called the dual effects theory, which suggests that social media is increasing participation for underengaged youth at the online level only, pretty much, and also reinforcing the participation amongst traditional cohorts that are going to participate anyways, upper socioeconomic, people from upper socioeconomic levels, males generally, and people that are naturally politically interested. They're going to be engaged in politics regardless of social media, but social media helps sort of reinforce that effect. And then there's the reinforcement effect, which suggests that social media does absolutely nothing for traditional disengaged cohorts and only helps to reinforce participation amongst people who are going to be engaged anyways. Those are kind of the two broad ones. There's also a thing called sort of the gradual or the incidental learning hypothesis, which sort of assumes that gradual exposure to political content on social media will at some point lead to political participation. So from that realm, those are the three sort of broad positions that I kind of tinker with and try to test in various ways. From my other perspective, from I guess the media psychology perspective, there are four broad, very interrelated theories. Somebody really needs to just combine them at once because they pretty much say the same thing. But it's a cultivation, framing, agenda setting, and priming theories. And these are all basically suggested again that exposure to media stimuli will activate particular cognitions in people's audiences, mental frameworks, minds, such that it's going to have some sort of corresponding reaction, whether it be cognitive, affective, or behavioral. And I guess for my understanding of audiences, it's just any individual that engages with any type of media product, media content in any respect, film, radio, television, newspapers, whatever, whether it's visual or textual stimuli that's been mediated by some producer. That's, to me, I guess, my understanding of audiences. I am in the middle. Yes, absolutely, people know how to manipulate media. Absolutely, they know how to engage with it. And of course, they're not just mindlessly duped by everything they see. At the same time, I think it would be incorrect to say that repeated exposure to repeated media representations have no effect on people whatsoever. It almost goes against the face, again, how we know how cognition works, and how people are consistently affected by environmental stimuli at the subliminal level, whether they want to be or not, and whether they know it or not. So I'm somewhere in the middle to suggest that, yeah, people can absolutely have agency. Absolutely, they can manipulate media, do with it, more or less whatever they want with it. But at the same time, they're also affected by it to the extent that they're not necessarily aware of it. Maybe it's an issue of semantics. Mass audiences in certain particular contexts, and probably particularly the Western context, are probably less so than they are now. But a good television show still averages about 6-7 million viewers. Considerably less than it was 30 years ago when it was up to 30, 40 or something like that. But that's still a sizable chunk. So even within regular traditional media, you still get a large cohort. They're not as big as they were before, and they're probably not going to get that big. But what you have are now going to be sort of things like ad hoc audiences, where a particular YouTube channel will get like 10 million views at any given point. that producer might not get the same level of audiences repeatedly, but every now and then you'll get these sort of simultaneous kind of audiences within at least one particular product. And it might not be consistent, and I think that's where producers are panicking and are trying to make their their particular content as attractive as possible to consistently attract as many viewers as possible. They're still fighting for advertising revenue, just like they did with traditional media. And then if you talk about other non-Western contexts where internet connections still aren't that prevalent or as strong, you still get people still only communication, I guess, with mass communications, just the traditional outlets. So you'll still get. I'm assuming here, and you're gonna have to check me on this. I'm assuming that Chinese television still, for instance, has considerably large audiences, as probably does India, right? In addition to a lot of internet users. So I think in Western context, the sizes might be decreasing, but you still get a lot of them, as opposed to their engaging with the internet. It's more ad hoc than sort of consistent, but it's still a lot of people engaging with media stimuli in some fashion or the other. Again, for my particular research, and this is not, and this is within sort of media, I am partial to quantitative sort of survey and experimental research because I am interested in identifying sort of causal mechanisms, and I can only be doing that through sort of a manipulation of particular variables. That's not to say that I don't have an appreciation for ethnographic or qualitative research, which I think is incredibly necessary and helps to complement quantitative research. But for my particular areas of interest, and I like to mess with people's heads, so the only way I can do that is through the direct manipulation of media stimuli. So I can't do that through an ethnography, unfortunately. In my particular case, it's because I'm concerned with media effects is longitudinal. Everything I do more or less is sort of temporary activation of particular cognitions following exposure, and that tells us about how what effect that might have in this short term. But we have absolutely no idea whether or not how long this is going to last, what the duration is, what the potency is. We have some ideas, and there's some people that have managed to do some longitudinal studies, but that is the main problem in my area. And that's because it's really expensive. It's really difficult to do longitudinal studies. It's really difficult to do longitudinal experimental studies, and so on. So for my particular case, I think that's the big challenge, is how do we extrapolate from our one-shot experiments to larger, broader, longer effects?